Welcome to another episode of the Leo Kanan podcast. Join Amanda and I as we discuss the responsibilities of both government and its citizens in navigating the esoteric principles which govern capitalism. We'll talk about how we can work together to create a more equitable and sustainable future. Let's get started.
So the U.S. is like a huge proponent of capitalism. It's like the basis for everything, especially post like World War II, where it's, communism, socialism, capitalism. And at this point today, it feels like capitalism has gone to a point where it's starting to like sink everything because everyone is so greedy. Like corporations are so greedy. People are so greedy. Like there's no restraint or like give back. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing that like a feel good or anything about like transactions. Like it almost to the point where it feels like even customer service is almost dead. Like you have to pay for it. It's hard to, to get someone on the phone. So how does capitalism get to this point?
Well, because there's no boundaries. So the government is only going to do what the people present to it in a united voice. Now, if there's a constituency or if there's a voice somewhere that can influence the government in terms of money or whatever, that system may always exist. But the people have the power to unite in one voice and demand better government. And so, because it's not capitalism that's the villain. It's, capitalism is just a Jupiterian form of government, the way communism is a Saturnian form of government. They're just different. They come from different aspects of consciousness. And so in order for capitalism to work, the people have to demand that it works. The government isn't going to do it for them. Every once in a while you get a government like, Teddy Roosevelt that demands that the government do a better job in regulating the relationship between the very wealthy and the plebs. But if the plebs, we've just gotten to a point in our process that the plebs are completely nullified and they're not demanding good government.
Yeah, because we have social media, which is putting people to sleep. They're so distracted. Like people can't even drive a car without checking their phone, which, how many laws are there that you're not supposed to be on your phone while you're driving? But that also distracts from any learning, like in the classroom, being able to focus on any issues, that they're interested or governmental, like any issues around them. And then lobbyists pay all this off. So how does democracy become democracy again? Because right now it just seems like it's all capitalism. It's all, politicians get into office on their quote unquote platform, but then as soon as they're in, they're bought by lobbyists to do whatever, regardless of whether it coincides with their platform.
Well, it's up to the people. If you get someone in office and they don't honor their platform, and then they turn into a puppet for whatever different lobbyists out there, then it's up to the people to immediately get them out of there and be smart enough to not listen to the honey wine that the Romans used to call it. You're gonna pour honey wine into my ear. And so that's what the politicians do to their constituency. They just pour the honey wine into their ear, and then they go get back in the office, and then they go back to doing what they were going to do, and then they go back, and when it's it's time for elections again, they go back to pouring honey wine into the plebs' ear. So ultimately, the plebs are going to pay the price for that. It's not if if the if the capitalist system, if we keep getting wealthier and wealthier as capitalists, and the plebs are not demanding that the government, regulate, because the capitalist system, you can easily sweet talk the plebs into not wanting regulation. They're going to control you. You don't want regulations. They're telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to approach it and give them laws, like you said, with cell phone use and things like that. But the minute you try to regulate the plebs, they start crying that you're taking their freedoms away,
Yeah.
because they feel like freedoms should mean no boundaries. And at the end of the day, they're children. It doesn't matter how old they are. They need they need boundaries.
Yeah.
And so if the government elects to give them boundaries without their permission, then they say their freedoms or their rights are being taken away.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to them regulating themselves or functioning within due bounds. They won't function within due bounds. You shouldn't need you shouldn't need a law that to tell people to not use cell phones while they're driving. You would think something like that should be common sense, but it's not.
Yeah.
And so you have to put a law in there. And so the more people will not regulate themselves or operate within due bounds, the more laws you have to establish in order to get them to do it.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I was thinking about is, like, especially with capitalism, is we're losing what's best for the greater good for the sake of money. Like, as an example, health insurance and pharmaceuticals in this country are ridiculous. But another one I have is the energy crisis. California has, some mandate that all new cars sold by, I want to say 2035. I could be wrong about that. But some date in the near future should all be electric. But they do not have the grid in California to support that many electric cars. And then you have solutions like Tesla's towers, which could provide free energy all over the place if you could set them up in the right places and make them big enough. But then nobody makes money off of that. And so nobody wants to do that until they can figure out how to do it. And it would also help the environment because it's a natural energy source.
Well, that's not going to happen. Because it with our form of government, so it always goes back to the form of government which regulates the society.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if the people are not demanding good government, if the people are not demanding it, if the people can easily be tricked and bamboozled and distracted and satiated, then that's what the top class will keep doing to them. And so it gets to a point where it can reach the point of no return. And that form of society then ends up collapsing in on itself, and it gives birth to a new form of society that demands regulations and rules without your permission. And then it dictates to the people, they begin to believe that their freedoms are being taken away. Mm-hmm. They begin to believe their rights are being taken away. But when they had all these so-called rights, they're not regulating themselves. And so they're looking for someone to blame, as opposed to everybody regulating themselves. Because once everyone starts regulating themselves and functioning within due bounds, the next thing is going to be, they're going to demand good government. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at it, look at the metrics that way, you can see how far we are away from good government, because the people. So look at it this way. There's this conversation between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, where Donald Trump is a businessman. He represents capitalism. He represents American business with all the, the bankruptcies or whatever the case may be, the paying off of the dancers or whatever that is. This is he is a snapshot of what American capitalism looks like, if whether we want to take ownership of that or not.
Yeah.
At the same time, Joe Biden with his all the memes and all the clips of him not paying attention or him misquoting his prompter or him wandering off from the mic or falling upstairs or falling downstairs, he represents a snapshot of the American government.
Yeah.
It's not just about Joe Biden. It's about this government is ailing. And so Joe Biden just happens to be sitting at the helm of it. So we can, as a nation, you can decide to go and with what American capitalism looks like and not knowing what that may look like on the other side of it or down the line if Donald Trump is in office, and or you can go with the ailing government, which is what Joe Biden represents, and try to fix that government because it is collapsing. So Joe Biden just happens to be, whether how accurate this media portrayal is of him always, like if he's going senile or if he's falling upstairs, he's wandering off from the mic, he's shaking invisible hands and all these things. We don't know if this is an editing process or what
it's filtered through.
What it's filtered through, because you remember, you always have to look at the medium. Think about it in terms of a snapshot in what Joe Biden represents. And so right now we are at an extremely important crossroads in American history, because that's majority vote. If we get Donald Trump in the office, it's because the American people put him there. If we get Joe Biden in the office, it's because the American people put him there. And whoever we put in office, we're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
With Joe Biden, we can regulate and we can demand better government. If you put Donald Trump in there, Donald Trump is proven that he's going to collapse the government.
Oh, yeah.
He is not going to leave office. He's not going to participate in a peaceful transition of power. And that is this form of government. That is the spine of this form of government. George Washington set the standard for that.
Yeah.
He set the term limit for all of that to be followed forever.
Yeah.
And by not becoming a monarch. And so Donald Trump is saying, okay, we're going to throw that away. And Joe Biden is respectful of that process, but he is also a snapshot of this ailing government.
Yeah. When I think about it, I like, especially people that need to force the change. They need to vote. They need to know what they're voting for. They need to be aware of what all the issues are so they can weed out all the horrible ass candidates that we have for everything. But it seems like we go through periods of time where people are really into activism and getting into voting and want to make a difference, and then the government squashes it. Like in the 60s, when you have the civil rights movement, you have all these like big things that are becoming socially aware, and the young generation is interested in it. They want change. They want to make changes. And the government just goes about squashing it. They assassinate all the leaders, all Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. Like, they just go after it to just like dumb people down and bring them back into apathy so they can run wild in the government to where we're at now.
That's true. That course of action did exist, but that has now expired. Just like at some point in this country, slavery was okay. Slavery is no longer okay. At some point, it was okay for the government to just assassinate everybody that protested it. And you have movies like All the President's Men and and Clear and Present Danger, where the government was just this dark, shadowy entity. And so of course elements of that does exist, but a lot of it has to be in the light now. Everything that's in the dark will come to the light. And so now it is important for the people to not relent. The government can't assassinate the people that's out speaking out, because they can, but now we're in a world where revolution would ensue. We're in a world where the whole world is watching. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's at a point where the world will demand that the U.S. gives their people fair government and good government, just like the U.S. has gone around the world. And whether it's been honest or dishonest, the premise has been that the U.S. is going around to make sure everyone is giving their people good government while they're not even giving their people good government. And so now it's the process where the purge happens.
Well, I feel like now they've switched to tools. So now it's social media is the government's tool to bring about the apathy. Like I felt when Obama was running, people were optimistic and wanted to be into politics and bring about change. Like especially, his first term, like it felt so optimistic at the time. And I liked Obama because he was very eloquent. He's very intelligent. I felt like he was moderate. I didn't feel like he swung too far left, because I don't think you should be too far on either side. And he was a fantastic representation for our country internationally. And I feel like since he's been removed and the election following his term, because he, obviously he couldn't do a third term, like social media, there's just been rampant campaigns and disinformation and plants to just bring people down and dumb people down to where this is where we're at. The best we have is Trump and Biden. Biden's, really, really old and, maybe going upstairs, which is his, he's deserved it. He's put in how many years as public service, Trump, he's a businessman that's made a lot of mistakes, but seems to keep himself in the limelight.
Well, you can't technically villainize him for failed business attempts. Business and entrepreneurship is about failing your way to the top. That is the methodology. You have to fail your way to the top. And at the same time, you can't just look at this in just the snapshot of what's happening and negate the process that brought us here. So, having said that, Biden is just the snapshot of a government that has been ailing for a very long time. It's not just all on Biden, but even like you said, since Obama, we've had, social media has grabbed a hold, whether or not that's coming, if that's an internal process or if that's something that's coming from outside the U.S. What we have to do as American citizens is focus on the cure. Social media is the actual virus. The virus is not what we think it is. The virus is social media. It is creating a mental virus in the American people, and the ones that don't realize that it is for business and that it is for it is a marketplace. And if they don't realize it, it's because they're the product. And so the majority of America is built on its citizens being a nation of consumers. And so until they realize that they're a nation of consumers, they're going to keep getting more to consume. You see, the power still lies in the people. Even though history says America has assassinated all the leaders and it's used all these subversive tactics and everything, it doesn't matter. The people, either the people are going to submit to it and it's just going to become a completely feminine society, which is what's happening because the people are submitting to the, all the distraction and the satiation of it. It's submitting to it as opposed to standing up to the government. You can stand up to a government peacefully. You don't have that's the purpose of everyone's vote actually counting. If the people are standing in such a united poise, a position, then the system can't be corrupted, because the people will know. The voices of the individual and the voices of the many will ring together. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it'll expose any type of pockets of false voices.
Yeah, because democracy, it's supposed to be, the better good, or, the majority rules. But it seems like at this point it's, the majority gets in there and then it gets twisted once it's in there.
Well, that's a part of it too, but it's also you can get people to vote against their own best interest.
Oh yeah.
So you can't forget that. It's not that people are actually voting, people in there based on the honorable expectation. You can get people to vote against their own interest.
Oh, yeah. Well,
that is the political game. And so the people, remember the ancient Greek word for someone that is not involved in government, just a common citizen, or what the Romans would call plebs, the Greeks called idiots. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
The Greek word for pleb was, or plebeian, it was an idiot. This is a person that's uninformed. This is a person that is not savvy enough that his government cannot bamboozle him. He's not paying attention. He's not educating himself on the political system that controls his life. The political system and the government that controls your life is through the means of which nature enacts upon that society or that culture. Nature acts on that culture through that form of government. And so if the man, a real man, which is, what's so poisonous about this manosphere thing, because it's actually not just poisonous, it's detrimental to the social health of America, because it's creating a conversation of men talking about, how to behave like women. We should have no concerns with what women are doing, or if they're collecting bodies, or if they're being promiscuous. That should be no concern of ours. We shouldn't care about that. What we should be focused on is what the government is doing. That's what men are supposed to be focused on. And no matter what age, once as a man, once you are of age to vote, that should be your primary focus, because that is by your means of which you can control the environment of what you live in. So if you go back to when women were fighting for their right to vote, they have been influencing the system ever since, and that's why we are living in a system that we're living in right now, or a society that we're living in right now. Not to villainize woman's right to vote, but that female perspective is influencing things that should have boundaries. And so, if you look on an individual relationship basis, what does a woman do? She's constantly testing her boundaries with the man, and this is what they're talking about on this manosphere thing. But the man should be focusing on the government. He should be focusing on himself, his craft, and focusing on the government. And then by virtue of that, their generation of women will get in lockstep with that.
Yeah, but I think it's important to have the female voice with the vote and the influence, because it's a different viewpoint, but also it's government and corporate America and everything is just starting to incorporate females at a high level consistently.
Okay.
And things that are concerning only females are being decided by men who have no interest, no knowledge, no firsthand knowledge. Like the field of gynecology is, even to this day, there are things that they don't understand about issues that females, have that can be very painful, can be detrimental to being able to have kids, can be fixed, but there's not enough research because it's all done by men, and half the time they just think women are being dramatic, or it's not that bad, or it's something else because she doesn't know she doesn't have the medical background to understand her body, even though it's her body. Like, when something's wrong. So
to agree with your point, I needed to make a point of clarification. I am in no way saying that a woman should not vote. That's not what I meant to say. So let me clarify that point. What I'm saying is there still has to be sacred spaces. A woman should absolutely have every right to voice what it is that concerns her well-being, her health, her body, her state of mind, and her environment. Okay, and there still should be elements of government that are sacred space to men, because government in it itself is a masculine entity. It is a projection of that nation's masculinity. Now, this is not about, we're discussing capitalism and communism and these things just based on natural laws, not giving my own perspectives here. What my own perspective is, within that natural law system, women should absolutely have the right to vote and have certain concerns. But there has to be a sacred space for men within the construct of that government. And when it comes to women, if their personal space and their personal concerns and rights are perspective, they won't try and destroy things that they shouldn't be trying to destroy.
I agree with you, but I feel we haven't got there yet, because women have only had the right to vote for 100 years or so, and it's all of women's sacred space, and things that are of their concern have been decided upon by men for the majority of that 100 years that women have been allowed to vote. That I don't feel that women feel like they're listened to. So when it comes to it's women, issues where it's a sacred space, women should be the ones leading this committee about these issues, because it is a female thing, not exclude men, but women should be leading these discussions or these decision-making policy things. They're just not listened to, and so they don't get those roles. And I think if that happens, women would be less inclined to go into things that are traditionally male, where, maybe you have one or two that can give some insight to different angles, but it's a predominantly male position because it's a predominantly male issue.
You're 100% right. Just like there has to be elements of government that are sacred space to men, there has to be elements of that same government that are sacred space to women. And that sacred space to women has to be anything and everything that concerns her body. And it should not be a dogmatic influence, because if it is a genuine state where it is church separation of church and state, then the woman, the voice, the united voice of the woman should be, this is what we want for our bodies. And even the women that vote pro-life, as opposed to pro-choice, that pro-life is based on a dogmatic influence. Whether we want to see it that way, or whether we want to see, admit it or not, it's coming from a dogmatic influence, and they base that decision, pro-life, on a religious perspective. But then what that means is there's no church, or there's separation of choice. There's no separation of church and state.
Yeah. That decision is a personal decision based on your beliefs and values and situation and whatever's going on. So, if you're, you get raped and you're very religious and it's your belief not to have an abortion, that's your choice.
You still don't have an abortion because your dogmatic belief system tells you no matter what happens to your body, an essay or whatever it is should not influence your choice in an abortion. You still don't have the right to influence women that want a choice.
Yeah.
Remember, the male energy is always active. If the majority of women are going towards pro-choice, and as men, they don't want pro-choice. But if you listen carefully to men, what this generation of men is doing is it's following lockstep with the previous generation of men, which pretty much is that a woman should not have the right to have an abortion. This is a large male population is saying this too. Well, women, you shouldn't have the right. It's my baby, and you shouldn't have the right to abort it. If you have the right to abort it, then I have the right to not take care of it. But being a man, you also have the right to not have sex with this woman. You also have the right to make sure that you understand who you're having sex with, and not just rush to have sex and not fully know this woman and then blame her for her choices, and you have no accountability in the process. But it was still your option, regardless of how sexually attracted you were to her in the moment, or how fat her booty was or cute her toes was. And so now all of a sudden, you're into a sexual dynamic with this woman, and now she's pregnant, and guess what? She wants an abortion, or she wants to keep the baby, and you don't want to be a dad. Mm-hmm. So the male accountability has to step up. And on an individual basis, it has to start on an individual basis where men understand, okay, I need to put in the work to get to know this woman and not think with my dick and then blame her for not fucking conceding to what I think is what should or should not happen.
Mm-hmm. And then, but doesn't this all tie back into capitalism, where you're not allowing abortion or access to contraceptives, and you end up with these kids that are, they're not being protected or educated or things like that. And it grows your pleb class to keep asleep when it comes to voting as soon as they turn 18 or, whenever they decide.
You can't blame capitalism for that. You can't blame capitalism because people are not thinking for themselves. You can't blame capitalism because they make it hard for people to think for themselves. Mm-hmm. People have to fight back mentally and regulate themselves and set boundaries for themselves. If you can't set boundaries for yourself, then ultimately the government is going to step in, and it has to set boundaries for you, or a form of government will have to be initiated that will set those boundaries for you. And we're at that precipice right now. So people cannot keep passing the buck and not having any accountability. The same way the collective can't do that. But that has to start on an individual basis so that it can evolve into demanding better government. And we are set back from it happening on an individual basis in enough that it creates a wave throughout society. So we have to find a way to start having the right conversations so that that can create that that wave effect. You see, the right conversations will. So that's where it comes, where, the manosphere is intentionally having the wrong conversation. These podcasts should be, all these hundreds of podcasts should be about men discussing how to be men and demanding better government. That's foundational in being a man. That's foundational. You're not, there's no alpha, and he's not educated on what his government is doing and how his government is regulating his environment. And if you are in part of a society where you need the collective to regulate that environment or demand good government, that is what nature is doing right now. And that's why everybody can have a podcast. But they're not having the right conversations with the podcast. They're focused on these social constructs that are not even accurate or within natural laws. They're trying to regulate female behavior instead of regulating their own behavior. You see what I mean? And until men individually regulate their own behavior, then they will automatically demand that the government regulates its behavior, which is the definition of good government. And then the government will stop trying to regulate female behavior.
Do you think men regulating their behavior has, it's gone unchecked for so long that that's why it's so difficult for it to just get started? Like, I'm trying to remember a time in history where men were really forced to regulate how they conducted themselves.
It's an evolutionary process. And so just like a tree that grows, a tree is going to adapt to that environment. It's going to be a really solid, strong tree if it doesn't have to evolve into a flexible tree that doesn't need to break with the wind. If its natural environment is a windy environment, then you're gonna see these are three trees that are thin and that have the ability to be flexible, and they sway in the wind. If a tree doesn't have that problem, you'll see trees in that environment that are thick trunk, that are huge and solid trees. But when they do randomly have to deal with overpowering winds or hurricanes or things, those trees will break. But, naturally, they don't always have to deal with that. And so that's why they are thick or solid trees. Now, if we use that as a metaphor for what's happening socially or culturally, the men have to evolve in a way that dictates control of their government, because their birthright in this country is that vote. Yeah. Your birthright in this country is that you are part of a government is by the people, for the people, and of the people. And that is not being taken seriously. And so therefore the people do not have control of that government. The few have control of that government. And so we may have evolved into an oligarchy. But doesn't matter. As long as we're in this form of government, it's not too late. Now, we're at a moment in history where we may lose this form of government. That's what's right out in front of us now. We may actually lose our form of government that was established 300 some odd years ago. with the documents, the constitutions, the Bill of Rights, the independence, and all of that thing. All of those things can go away if taken for granted. Mm-hmm. And that is not real enough to the people.
Yeah. What I was going to ask is, do you think reinstituting the draft would give more incentive to understand the government, understand what they're fighting for? Because this election, the fact that Trump's able to run throws the whole election into question.
We're going to save that conversation about the draft and a Donald Trump government and a Joe Biden government. We'll save that for part 2.